"If you can't make room for family in this home," my mother-in-law said, from across my own dining table, on the evening of my 31st birthday, "then perhaps you're the one who should find somewhere else to stay." My husband sat right beside her. He didn't say a word. I want to tell you I immediately fired back with something brilliant. I didn't. I sat very still, held my wine glass, and felt something harden inside me that had been soft for far too long. What neither of them knew, what no one at that table knew, was that 2 hours before our dinner guests had arrived, I'd found something in our spare bedroom closet that answered every question I'd been afraid to ask for 3 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Erin. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a senior project manager for a tech firm in downtown Toronto. I've lived in the city my whole life. I know its rhythms. The way the cold rolls in off Lake Ontario in November like it has a personal grievance. The way summer light lingers past 9 o'clock and makes you feel, briefly, like anything is possible. I bought my condo at 26. A one-bedroom plus den on the 14th floor in Leslieville, a neighborhood I loved for its coffee shops and Saturday farmers markets, and the particular quality of light on the street in early autumn. The down payment was entirely mine. Money I'd been saving since my first salaried job at 22, tucked carefully into an FHSA, and then transferred into a dedicated savings account over 4 years. My name alone was on the title. I met my husband when I was 27. He was warm and self-deprecating and made me feel genuinely seen in a way I hadn't felt before. We got engaged after 18 months. When we discussed where we'd live, it seemed obvious. My condo was newer, well-located, and already mine. He moved in. We didn't touch the title. There was no reason to. His mother, Harriet, came with the arrangement in ways I hadn't anticipated. Harriet was 63 years old and had opinions about everything. The way I organized my kitchen cabinets, the type of laundry detergent I used, whether I was making efficient use of my freezer. She treated my home like a renovation project she'd been brought in to oversee, and she treated me like a junior contractor who kept failing to grasp the specifications. She lived 40 minutes away in Scarborough, but appeared in my living room with a frequency that suggested she'd forgotten it wasn't hers. My husband's response to any friction between us was always identical. "She means well. She just loves us. Can you let it go this once?" So I let it go, and then I let the next thing go. And the thing after that. And somewhere in the accumulation of all those small surrenders, I stopped noticing how much of myself I was losing. Harriet had a particular technique. She framed every intrusion as love. She would rearrange my bookshelves while I was at work and call it freshening the space. She would make plans on our behalf without consulting me, and then be wounded when I expressed surprise. She would commandeer conversations at dinner, redirect my husband's attention from me to her with a fluency that suggested long practice, and then tell people I was still adjusting to family life, as though 3 years of marriage were a probationary period I hadn't yet completed. I told myself it was manageable, that I was being mature, that choosing my battles was wisdom. I was wrong. I was just disappearing, one small concession at a time. The birthday dinner had been my husband's idea. 31st is not a milestone birthday, but he'd wanted to do something proper. He made a reservation at the Italian place I loved on Queen Street and then canceled it without telling me, because Harriet had suggested a dinner at home would be more intimate. By the time I found out, she'd already drafted the guest list. That afternoon, an hour before I needed to start getting ready, I went to the spare bedroom closet, looking for our home insurance binder. The renewal notice had arrived in the mail that morning, and I needed the policy number. I didn't find the insurance binder right away. What I found first, tucked behind a stack of my husband's old university textbooks on the second shelf, was a brown accordion folder I didn't recognize. I almost put it back. I was tired and I had guests coming in less than 2 hours, and I almost, genuinely almost, slid it back onto the shelf and kept looking for the binder. I opened it instead. The first document was a printout of a property title transfer form. Not a completed one, a draft. My name appeared in the current owner field. In the transfer to section, 2 names had been typed, my husband's and Harriet's, jointly. I read it 3 times. Then I read the email printed directly beneath it. It was from Harriet to my husband, sent 11 months ago. The subject line was, moving forward on the property matter. She had written. And I remember this with the kind of precision that only arrives with shock. Erin trusts you completely. She won't read the fine print if you tell her. It's just updating the household financial documents. She outlined the plan in 4 numbered points. My husband would tell me we needed to sign an updated emergency contact form, which would contain, buried in a schedule at the back, a consent to add both names to my title. I kept pulling documents from the folder. There were printed records of e-transfers from my husband's personal account. Every month for 17 months, between $800 and $1,200 each, sent to Harriet under the memo Family Support. I did the rough arithmetic on my phone, sitting on the closet floor, somewhere between $14,000 and $20,000, transferred without ever being mentioned to me, while we maintained a joint Cheekwing account. I contributed to equally every 2 weeks. Then, near the bottom of the folder, I found something that landed differently than anything else. It was a letter, printed on personal stationery with Harriet's home address at the top, addressed to the Director of Human Resources at Meridian Analytics. The firm I'd left 18 months ago under circumstances I had told myself, ever since, I simply hadn't fully understood. The letter was dated 22 months ago. Harriet had written it as an unsolicited professional character reference for me, sent during an internal promotion review I had applied for. A director-level position, the role I'd been told I was a strong candidate for, until, suddenly, I wasn't, and the feedback I'd received was so vague I hadn't known where to place it. In the letter, Harriet described me as capable at a task management level, but not equipped for senior leadership. She raised, in language that was careful enough to be plausibly deniable and pointed enough to do damage, concerns about my difficulty maintaining professional relationships under sustained pressure. She signed it as my mother-in-law, which gave it an intimacy no formal reference could replicate. Someone who knew me from the inside, raising quiet doubts. I had not gotten that promotion. I had assumed I hadn't been the strongest candidate. I had grieved it privately, doubted myself for months afterward, and eventually moved to a different firm, telling myself the experience had been a lesson in resilience. My husband had held me while I cried about it. He had told me I was more than good enough. He had known the entire time. I sat on that closet floor for several minutes. I'm not going to tell you I didn't cry, because I did. For about 5 minutes, the kind of crying that is more about clarity than grief. Then I stopped. I photographed every document with my phone. I opened my contacts and found my university friend, a family lawyer who practiced in Ontario, and sent her the images with a message that said, "Call me before tonight if you possibly can. I need to understand what I'm holding." She called back within the hour. We spoke for 40 minutes. By the time I walked out of that spare bedroom, I had a plan. I also had, on my phone, a forwarded copy of Harriet's letter to Meridian Analytics sent directly to their current HR director with a brief note requesting confirmation of whether any unsolicited third-party communication had been received during my promotion review process. I didn't need a reply that evening. What I had was already enough. I went and put my earrings in. I went and opened a bottle of wine. I smiled at the first guest who arrived, and I moved through the pre-dinner hour with a steadiness I hadn't felt in longer than I could remember. Harriet arrived at 6 with a cheesecake she'd bought from a bakery in her neighborhood. She set it on my kitchen counter without asking, announced that the appetizers I'd made were a bit rich for a weeknight birthday, and settled into the armchair she'd long since decided was hers. Dinner moved the way. Dinners always moved when Harriet was present. Everything orbited her. She spoke across other people's conversations. She redirected my husband's attention toward herself whenever he and I began talking. She made small, precise comments about the food. "This sauce is quite heavy, isn't it? Though I suppose it's festive." While our guests ate without complaint and said nothing. My friend Kim was there. So was Priya, who had worked with me at Meridian during the promotion process and had been, I now understood, equally bewildered by its outcome. Adam's cousin and his wife. My husband's colleague from his office. I watched Harriet all through dinner. The moment came when Priya asked me about a project I'd been leading. Something I was proud of. Something that had required 18 months of careful work. I'd been explaining it for perhaps 40 seconds when Harriet turned to my husband and asked whether he'd remembered to book his car's service appointment. I stopped mid-sentence. Priya looked at Harriet. Harriet smiled at my husband. My husband looked at his plate. "He hasn't," Harriet said, satisfied. Then she turned back to me and deployed the expression she saved for moments like this. Warm on the surface, a closed door underneath. "Don't be put out, Aaron. We're all family here. You'll get used to how we do things." "How you do things," I said. She paused. "I beg your pardon?" "I said how you do things, not how we do things." The table went quiet. My husband's jaw tightened. "Aaron." Harriet set her fork down carefully. "I have always tried to support this household. I've given my time, my attention, my energy." "I know exactly what you've given," I said. Something in my tone must have told her the conversation had changed shape. She stopped. Then my husband cleared his throat. He'd been building to something all evening. I could feel it now, the pressure of it. "If you're going to speak to my mother that way," he said, very evenly, "in our home, I think you need to take a moment." Harriet followed his lead, smoothly. "This is your home too, Adam. You have every right to feel comfortable in it. If Aaron can't make room for family, for people who have given so much to support this household, then perhaps she's the one who should reconsider her position here." She let it settle. Her voice had the particular authority of someone who has rehearsed. "Family comes first," she said. "That's simply how it is." I heard Kim, across the table, draw a careful breath. I looked at my husband. He held my eyes for 2 seconds and then looked away. I pushed my chair back. The room went still in the way that happens before something irrevocable. I think everyone expected me to go to the kitchen, to excuse myself, and return composed and smaller. That had been the pattern. That had always been the pattern, and they knew it, and I think some part of the table assumed it without thinking. I didn't go to the kitchen. I picked up my wine glass, took one slow sip, set it down, and walked around the length of the table. I stopped beside Harriet's chair. I crouched down until my face was level with hers. I kept my voice very quiet, just for her. "I know about the title transfer form," I said. "The draft with my name on it and yours. I have photographs of it, and of the email where you told my husband I wouldn't read the fine print if he framed it the right way." She went completely still. "I know about the letter you sent to Meridian Analytics 22 months ago. The one where you told their HR team I wasn't ready for senior leadership. The promotion I applied for. The one I didn't get." I watched the color leave her face, and I know about the e-transfers. 17 months of them, coming out of our joint account, going to yours. I straightened up. "Aaron." Her voice had dropped to almost nothing. "I don't know what you think you've." "I don't think anything," I said, at full volume now, so that everyone at the table could hear me clearly. "I know. And so does my lawyer. And so, as of about an hour before dinner, does the current HR director at Meridian." I walked to the other end of the table and placed the photographs I'd printed before the guests arrived, directly in front of my husband. He picked them up. His hands were steady at first, then they weren't. "That's the title transfer draft," I said. "That's the email discussing how to get me to sign it without understanding what I was signing. That's 17 months of e-transfers from the account I contribute to equally. And that is a copy of a letter your mother sent to my employer without my knowledge, which I have reason to believe materially affected my career at a critical point. The table held a silence I had never heard in my own home before. My husband set the photographs down and looked at me. "You told me," I said, "that this is a family home. That family comes first." My voice was steady, and I was genuinely surprised by that steadiness. "I agree entirely. Which is why I've already spoken with a family lawyer this afternoon. The condo is registered solely in my name under a title purchased entirely with premarital savings. Ontario's Family Law Act is quite clear on how that's classified and what claims can be made against it." Harriet gripped the edge of the table. "I need you both to leave tonight," I said. "Take what you need for the next week. You can arrange to collect the rest at a time. My lawyer will confirm with you in writing. If you have questions, she'll be the right person to speak to." "Erin, you can't just," my husband started. "I can," I said. "I have." It took them 50 minutes. My husband moved through the bedroom in near silence, packing with the efficiency of someone who understood that words were no longer useful. Harriet was less quiet. I could hear her from the kitchen, where I sat with Kim and Priya while the other guests said their goodbyes, urging my husband in a low and increasingly strained voice that I was overreacting. That context was everything. That nothing had to mean what I was clearly deciding it meant. I made tea. Kim sat across from me without trying to fill the silence. Priya had both hands around her mug and kept looking at me with an expression I didn't entirely have language for. When the front door closed, I walked to the window. I watched them cross the parking lot. I watched my husband load a bag into his car. I watched Harriet settle into the passenger seat without looking back at the building. Their taillights disappeared around the corner. "Are you okay?" Kim said. "I will be," I said, and I meant it. The weeks that followed were not clean or easy. I want to be honest about that. Divorce, even a necessary one, is grief. I grieved the version of the marriage I had believed in. I grieved the years of energy I'd spent managing a dynamic that had been engineered to exhaust me. I grieved the promotion I never received, the self-doubt that had moved into the space where that confidence should have been. All the times I'd wondered quietly if I simply wasn't as capable as I'd thought. My lawyer filed the separation paperwork within 10 days. Because the condo had been purchased entirely before the marriage with documented personal savings, establishing my sole ownership was procedurally straightforward. My husband signed over all claims without contesting it. I think by that point he understood what contesting would require him to put on the record. Meridian Analytics sent their response 12 days after I'd written to them. The letter was worded carefully. Institutions are always careful. But it confirmed that an unsolicited third-party communication had been received during my review process and had been referenced in the committee's assessment. It wasn't the language I'd have needed for a formal legal claim. It was the language I needed to stop wondering if I'd imagined it. It was enough to know that the doubt I'd been living with for 2 years had had a source. And the source was real, and I had found it. Harriet's plan to be added to my title never advanced beyond a draft. She had no legal standing to pursue it, and my husband, having signed the separation agreement, had no mechanism to assist her. The e-transfers were factored into the settlement as matrimonial asset claims. I didn't recover the full amount. What I recovered was the certainty that I hadn't been wrong to feel what I'd been feeling for 3 years. That the low-grade unease, the sense that something was off, in a way I couldn't quite name, had been accurate all along. 8 months after that birthday dinner, I sold the condo. I didn't have to. It was mine, the title was clear, and I still loved the neighborhood. But I wanted a start that felt entirely new, and I had the means to make one. I used the proceeds and relocated to Ottawa. A director-level position had come through at a firm there. The kind of role I'd been a candidate for before a letter I'd known nothing about had quietly closed the door on it. This time, the offer came on its own terms. I accepted it the same afternoon it arrived. I found a townhouse in the glebe, 3 blocks from the canal. I furnished it slowly, choosing things I actually liked, rather than things that looked appropriate for a shared space. I have a small backyard where I planted tomatoes last spring, kept them alive through August, and felt an amount of satisfaction about it that was probably disproportionate and absolutely fine. I think about that birthday dinner sometimes, less than I expected to. I think about the moment I crouched beside Harriet's chair and spoke quietly enough that only she could hear, and watched the certainty drain out of her face when she understood that the woman she'd spent 3 years treating as manageable had, in a single afternoon, become something else entirely. They had built a plan around my trust. They had refined it, timed it, arranged it carefully. What they hadn't planned for was the afternoon I spent on a closet floor, reading a brown accordion folder, or the 45 minutes I spent on the phone with someone who knew exactly what those documents meant. They had mistaken my silence for permission. They were wrong. Harriet's ultimatum, delivered across my own table on my own birthday, was not the moment I started losing. It was the last moment they believed they had the power to make me feel that I might. Everything after that was mine. If you've ever been told that keeping the peace is the same as having peace, I want you to hear this. It isn't. Quiet built from making yourself smaller isn't peace. It's just a slower way of disappearing. The real thing feels different. I know that now, standing in my kitchen on a Wednesday morning in October, watching the first frost settle on the backyard I chose for no reason other than that I wanted it. What would you have done if you'd found what I found in that closet? Tell me in the comments below, and follow Passion Revenge Stories for more. Before you go, drop the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels.